Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Tattershaw. I am the Vice President of Business Development for the ASMG group of companies. ASMG have extensive manufacturing facilities in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Today, we are going to present to you an objective discussion on what's going on in China and the US that might well influence your reshoring decisions. This will be the first in a series of podcasts on reshoring. And hopefully we will give you an objective view on the justification to reshore to avoid supply chain disruption.
Firstly, please let me introduce you to Dr. Eamon McKinney. Dr. McKinney is an eminent sinologist who is widely regarded as one of the foremost authorities in the world on China-related business issues. He has been actively involved with China foreign business for more than 40 years and was instrumental in the first modern Sino-foreign joint venture in 1980. Since 1985, he has advised hundreds of foreign companies on their China strategies. Dr. McKinney and his team are on the ground in China and have a deep and unrivaled knowledge of the real critical situation and challenges. He will give you a rarely considered view relating to reshoring from China and give you the rationale why you must act now to ensure you minimize your supply chain disruption. Also, please let me introduce you to Harry Moser, who is the founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative, after being president of high-end machine toolmaker GF Machining Solutions for 22 years. Harry's awards include Industry Week's Manufacturing Hall of Fame, Quality Magazine's Quality Professional of the Year, SPE's Molder Design of the Year, and FabShot Direct's Manufacturer of the Year. Harry participated actively in President Obama's insourcing forum at the White House in 2012. Harry is a member of the Department of Commerce Investment Advisory Council and has been frequently quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, New York Times, Financial Times, New Yorker, and USA Today, and has also been seen on Fox Business, Market Watch, and other national TV and radio programs. Harry has a BS and MS in engineering from MIT and an MBA from the University of Chicago. Harry is a man on a mission who is recognized undoubtedly as the US national champion of reshoring. I have grown to admire him immensely in recent months as he relentlessly pursues his noble objective of reshoring 5 million US manufacturing jobs and all of the associated benefits to the economy.
Welcome, Eamon.
Morning, Mark. Or good evening, as it is there. Nice to see
Hello.
you again.
Welcome, Harry.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here. Yeah.
So, based on what I've said, with the objective of looking at reshoring, a view from China and then a view from the US, I'm going to ask a few questions and then we can have an open discussion. First question is for you, Dr. McKinney. Eamon, can you please tell me what the rarely considered real situation is in China on the ground, a view from China, and what other issues do you see that are contributing to the strong belief that North American companies should be seriously reconsidering their Chinese manufacturing strategy?
Okay. Well, here in China, things appear to be back to normal. Everybody's back at work. Some people are wearing masks, some not. It's as if COVID never happened on the face of it. But attitudes have changed tremendously this year. The COVID situation, the tariffs, and the general rhetoric against China has had an effect here. People no longer see much of a future in trade with North America in China. And this has been going on for some considerable time. The problems here are amplified by the fact that so many of the suppliers in China have now actually gone out of business. The town in which our head office is based, Jining in China, 3 of the major flagship industries of that town have subsequently gone out of business. And what we're finding is that as we're trying to get orders fulfilled, try to repair relationships, it's becoming increasingly difficult. So that's part of the situation. But Chinese people have reluctantly come to the conclusion that this decoupling, this separation of the two political and economic systems between North America and China is irrevocable. The insults and abuse that have been hurled at the Chinese, that's just not done in China. I appreciate in the States today, unfortunately, most of the rhetoric is insults and abuse. And that doesn't work on the international stage. So the Chinese people are mightily offended by what's been going on. And reluctantly, again, I would hasten to add that they are decoupling. And we're now working with suppliers here who've had long-term relationships with American manufacturers that are terminating those relationships. So what concerns me is the decoupling conversation has been going on for some time. A lot of people have seen this as being inevitable for a number of years. What's concerning is the pace at which it is happening. I mean, we're seeing a decoupling in technology. So you take a situation like Huawei, for example. Huawei's technology now is under US pressure, is being banned in the UK, they're pressuring the Europeans. It's not going to be in Australia, Canada, it's not going to be in New Zealand. We're seeing it in the media with the TikTok situation. We're seeing a decoupling in scientific and educational exchange. And we are now seeing a dismantling of the supply chains, of the global supply chains. And again, China's doing this reluctantly, but I think they just see absolutely no alternative whatsoever. On the issue of reshoring, and again, I would like to make the point that we work exclusively in the industrial sector. So that's what I'll speak to, because I can speak to that from first-hand experience. In the industrial sector, I mean, we've been advising and working with our clients for reshoring back to North America for some years now. Unrelated to the COVID situation, unrelated to the recent hostility or the tariffs, purely and simply because in the industrial sector, the cost benefits that were originally conveyed by China are no longer there. It just doesn't make financial sense. So, you know, I appreciate Harry comes at this from, you know, a patriotic point of view. I'm just looking at the numbers. And the numbers are, I mean, if you're employing a global supply chain that extends to China, then you need to seriously look at your total costs. The unit cost may still appear to be cheaper in China, but when you factor in all the other considerations, then the business case isn't automatically there anymore. And yes, certainly I would encourage all American suppliers to do their sums again, because the situation is not good now. I think any pretense at supply chain security is diminished. And it's an interesting and it's a troubling situation, to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of these relationships have been very, very good relationships between North American companies and Chinese companies for some years. And that's now being broken, unfortunately. It's a sad situation, actually. And I do have some concerns at the speed at which this is all accelerating. I mean, when countries start closing down embassies, as the US did with the Chinese embassy in Houston, and China retaliated by closing down the American embassy in Chongqing, these are very worrying times. Yeah. So that's the situation on the ground, briefly, Mark. I wish it was happier news, but my concern is that a lot of American companies now are talking about considering reshoring and trying to make sense of it all. Yeah. I would just caution that decision may be made for you. It may not be your decision alone.
Thank you, Eamon. Dr.
No.
You raised some really interesting points. And of course, along with the points that you raise, there are a number of reasons and justification that Harry's going to educate us on why North American companies should be considering seriously reshoring back. Harry, please, can you give me some background on reshoring and how you consider that the COVID situation has created awareness and really amplified the concerns with American companies?
Sure, Mark. And Eamon, thanks for your insights. Just for maybe a clarification, although my organization is motivated by patriotism, we focus entirely on the numbers also. So I think you'll see we're pretty well there. To give some background, reshoring is only interesting because the US has done so much offshoring, so much importing. And specifically, we have about a $800 billion per year goods trade deficit, a good chunk of it with China, but a lot of it scattered around the world. So the whole motivation for reshoring is to overcome that and bring some, but far from all of that back to the US. So to understand that offshoring, this chart shows the results of a survey that we did with Plant Moran, which is one of the major US auditing and consulting companies. And we asked manufacturers, why do you buy parts, components, kind of things Eamon deals with? Why do you get them offshore instead of domestically? And overwhelmingly, they said price. In a few cases, it was unavailable here, but that was probably because the companies that made them here had gone out of business or moved all their production offshore because they could not compete with the offshore lower price. So just have to understand that price is the overwhelming driver. Next slide. And this slide gives some insight into the price differential. Now this is spread out over the last 10 years, but it shows the China price as a percentage of the US price. So the FOB price in China as a percentage of the FOB price in the US. And at 100% they're equal. At 50%, the China price is half the US. And you can see the mode, the high point is around 70%. So as a rough number, as an approximation, the US price is about 40% higher than the Chinese price. And that's what has driven companies to go to China and similarly to Mexico, India, other low wage places to get product at a much, much lower price. Next slide. A trend away from that or counteracting that, this chart shows the unit labor cost. So the cost expressed in dollars to make a given thing in each of the countries. The red line's the US, a couple other countries in there, the blue line's China. And the whole purpose of the chart is to show that because Chinese wages have been for 15 or 20 years going up at 10 to 15% a year, and productivity's done well, maybe 6, 7, 8% a year, but still the net result is that the labor cost to make things in China has risen about 400% in the last 20 years. And so even before the trade war, even before COVID, work was coming out of China. A lot of it was going to Asia, India, Mexico, maybe 15%, something like that of it coming to the US. Next slide. And because of that effect in China and other important considerations, the trend of work back to the US has been rather positive. So in this case, we show reshoring done by US companies and FDI, foreign direct investment, done by foreign companies. So think General Motors and Toyota, for example. And the sum of those two trends in 2010 was about 6,000 jobs announced in that year. And by 2017, it had gotten to 190,000 in the year. And then subsequently fell off a bit to about 180,000, 150,000 in 2018, 120,000 in 2019. We say it peaked, it surged in 2017 because of the Trump tax cuts, corporate tax cuts, and regulatory business friendliness, so to speak. And then it fell off because of the trade war, but because of the uncertainties, business uncertainties, that companies said, let's wait and let's see what happens. So Trump won on one case, and I'd say lost on the other. Next. And then the COVID crisis came along with every hour on television, you were told about, we don't have enough masks, we don't have enough gloves, gowns. The US doesn't make most of its pharmaceuticals. 95% of the penicillin comes from China, on and on and on. And so there's a very strong effort by people to insist on having things made here and by the government to mandate that, especially in medical related products like these. So I'm sure that enough bills will pass, actions will be taken, subsidies, whatever, mandates, that the US will become relatively self-sufficient in most of these items. Next. Increasingly, that awareness is spread over to other products. So The US is very dependent on, for example, in the upper left-hand corner, rare earth minerals. China makes 70, 80, 90% of them, something like that. The 5G, the discrete electronic components. In apparel and footwear, the US imports 97% of what it consumes. Machine tools, we get most from offshore. Even the Defense Department every 2 years puts out a report that describes all the products, all the components, the materials it cannot find in the US, maybe can't even find it allies, and has to go to what they consider to be not an ally to get those things, which is a dangerous position for the United States. So I'm sure that the medical products will be brought back, and I believe much of these other what are considered essential products will be also. For an interesting comparison, I dug into our data. We have data on thousands of cases of reshoring and FDI. And for a comparison for China, China and Germany are tied as number one in greenfield FDI, foreign direct investment. So putting in a new factory here. Tied, between them, they have a big share of the total. But in reshoring, China is clearly the number one source. About 40%, that's 40% of the reshoring that has come to the United States by US companies from offshore has come out of China. And again, for perspective, the number of jobs coming back from China in reshoring is 200 times as many as from Germany. So the US has been pulling a lot back from China and very little back from, for example, Europe. So my conclusion is that over the last 10 years, reshoring has done very well, specifically from China, but also from other countries, has done very well and will continue to succeed in coming back. And it sounds like from what Eamon says, we'll be forced to do so even faster.
Well, thank you, Harry. That's really interesting background information. Has this situation, obviously with COVID and everything else that we talk about, the tariffs, devaluing of the dollar, all of these other issues related, have they really accelerated the reshoring efforts of American companies? And how, in your experience, how do you prove to American companies using your optimization tools that their best value TCO, for their supply chain is a real case that they should seriously look at?
So in terms of the effect of COVID and the pandemic, the US surveys have been done, for example, by ThomasNet, and they found that the number of companies likely to reshore to North America went up significantly from March 2020 to May of 2020, so that by May of 2020, about 64% of the companies they surveyed said that they were thinking of bringing work back. So up substantially from before the COVID crisis. This chart shows the impact of using total cost. So total cost is the FOB price plus things like duty, freight, packaging, carrying cost of inventory, intellectual property risk, the benefit of having a Made in USA label, all these things that are somehow going to be a little different between two suppliers. And the blue chart, the blue line, shows the first 180 cases we had of China versus the US. So it shows the Chinese price as a percentage of the US price, Chinese FOB price, US FOB price. So you can see the peak is around, the mode is around 70%, and about 8% of the area under the blue curve is to the right of the 100% line, and therefore, and to the right of the 100%, the Chinese price is higher than the US. So looking at price, only about 8% of what these 180 companies looked at, would they make it in the US? But looking at total cost, that's the red line, 32%. And if there happened to be a 15% Trump tariff, then 46%. So the whole purpose of this chart is to show that by doing the math correctly, a significant portion, far from all, far from 70, 80% of it can come back, but 20, 30% can come back and be equally or more profitable as long as the companies actually do the math correctly. So a little more insight on this. Some of the listeners may know Deming, who was the guru of quality and process improvement. And one of his famous quotes, his fourth principle was, stop buying on the basis of price instead minimize total cost. So another perspective on that, Toyota, which is famous for lean, famous for making the great product and do it in the most efficient way, bringing value to the customer. They have what they call the Toyota Production System, TPS, and many companies try to copy that. And what they do, they list 7 wastes, 7 things that are a waste of your time and energy. They call them MUDA. And if you look at those 7, almost all of them are made worse by offshoring and inventory, motion, all these kind of things. There's more of that when you have to ship things, 6,000 miles or 4,000 miles than there is when you make them 10 miles from the assembly plant. So there's a logic that companies are starting to follow that would tend to support reshoring.
Wow, thanks, Harry. That's so interesting. Eamon, you've helped around 250 companies setting up their Chinese manufacturing projects. Many of these companies are US or North American companies. You're now advising these companies to reshore in some cases. Apart from the Chinese-driven sort of decoupling of relationships that you spoke about previously, in your opinion, what are the other key factors that are driving these radical recommendations?
Well, firstly, what I've been advising everybody for a while is let's do the cost model. Let's continue to evaluate the TCO. So, before you do that, you can't advise anybody on anything. And I mean, some of the products, they're still hard to make a case with TCO to return them to the United States. But whatever a company's thinking was prior to COVID, they need to have a serious rethink. There's other factors going on here. I mean, one of them, for example, and I mean, it's a problem that we're encountering with just about everybody we're dealing with over here is, well, I'll give you one example. One American company who's been buying componentry over here, has been generally ordering about 1 million pieces, 1.2 million a year. Now, all of a sudden, they're only interested in 200,000. So again, that brings us up now with the Chinese supplier. Well, let's look at our pricing again, because the price for 200,000 isn't the same for 1.2 million. So we're dealing with less volumes now, and that's got to be factored in as well. Whereas the business case might have been there for 1 million pieces, it isn't there for 200,000, because so many of the other costs that go on are fixed. The other thing is, and I don't think we've actually seen this hit yet, is so many of the companies who've been exposed, or the global supply chains have been exposed over the recent months, are going to have to answer some serious questions as end of year results come out. I mean, people have fallen short of projections. Shareholders are going to be asking serious questions about supply chain security. And that, I have to say, has been something that's been taken for granted for far too long. Companies talk in, high terms about having contingency plans and everything like that. But when it came down to it, very few had competent contingency plans in place. So the disruption to American manufacturing, I don't think we've actually seen the full effects of that yet. And it may be early next year before we do. Quite how companies make projections for next year with any degree of accuracy, I have no idea whatsoever, because none of us know what the world is going to look like in January or February next year. So I think what we're seeing is now that a lot of the major companies are reevaluating their supply chains based on lower volumes, based on a heightened sense of interest in the concept of supply chain security. So we're going to see like a major shake-up, but I don't think we have seen the full effects of this on America's industrial base as yet. So it's going to be an interesting next few months. But, the view from China is right now supply chains are in turmoil.
Understood. Okay, thank you, Eamon. Well, I appreciate that. Harry, anything else to say before we close up today? I mean, it's been really educational for me and an interesting discussion.
Quite interesting. Honored to hear Eamon's view on this. And in many ways, I'd say 80%, 90%, we have about the same view on what's happening, what's important, et cetera. To your listeners, the Reshoring Initiative, that's my group, is a nonprofit, and our mission is to help companies objectively decide, look at the total cost, et cetera, provide tools to help them make that informed decision. And if any of the listeners want that help from us, you can go to our website, reshorenow.org, and find most of it's free on there to help you. If you want to contact me, email me, call me, and love to help you do this smoothly.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, it's a fantastic website, so informative and helpful to people. And I want to, firstly, obviously a huge thank you to you, Eamon, Dr. McKinney, and Harry, two experts without any shadow of doubt. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope, that the viewers found this, our first podcast, interesting and informative. It should really get people's attention. Please look out for the next podcast in the series as we begin to focus in more detail on the challenges North American companies face with manufacturing in China, and how companies like ASMG, my company, and organizations like reshorenow.org can help provide you with assistance and help you optimize your vertically integrated reshore supply chain and provide that solution. Really tremendous resource. Future presenters will be subject matter industry experts, politicians, and topics will include recent reshore successes. There's nothing like a success story to get people's attention, of course. One thing I think we can all agree on is that, this terrible COVID situation has really focused our minds on the supply chain and the subsequent supply chain disruption. It's a major, major issue. And if you compound that with the politics, the dollar, just everything else that we've been talking about, there are a number of reasons which are undeniably reaching a critical tipping point, in my opinion, from what I've heard, that will profoundly affect and disrupt the US and the Chinese supply chain. So, Harry, again, thank you so much. Keep up the great work. Yeah, it's tremendous. Such a noble cause to, bring work back, obviously, and most importantly, jobs back to the US and North American economy.
North America, yep.
And enjoyed listening to Harry. It's always an education. Thank you, Harry.
So, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
All right.